Welcome to Sport Plus. I'm James, and this is the Toyota GR86. So, is the Toyota GR86 the antidote to all of the problems and annoyances of modern performance cars, being overweight, overcomplicated, and overpowered? Can this car drive straight into pole position of the Goldilocks Zone of sports cars and performance cars? I can tell you that in a lot of respects, yes, it does. The big talking point is the new engine. Well, not new, but the updated engine. So it's gone from being a 2-litre 4-cylinder boxer to a 2.4-litre 4-cylinder boxer, which has made a huge difference straight off the bat. I'm happy to say that. So now the motor's pushing out 174 kilowatts of power and 250 newton meters of torque, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the car only weighs 1,285 kilograms, so it's not having to push around a lot. And crucially, that torque hole right in the middle of the rev range the GT86 had, this car doesn't have it. It's non-existent. This engine, with its extra displacement, its extra 400 mil of goodness, it's transformed the engine and the way it sort of delivers power. This no longer feels like a slow car to me. It feels like it's just right, offers just enough performance, especially on a slippery day like today. So 0 to 100 is dealt with in a claimed 6.3 seconds. I reckon in the right conditions, on a sticky bit of bitumen with the tyres warmed up, I reckon you can get even faster than that. I reckon you might even be able to dip into 5.9 seconds. The character of the engine itself, it's a combination of great and just a little bit meh. It revs out to 7,500 RPM, which is lovely, and the top end of it is actually quite exciting. So you're incentivized to rev it out and sort of revel in the naturally aspirated instant response goodness that this thing can offer. Unfortunately, there's no getting away from the acoustic experience that I'm not suffering through while revving it out, but having to go through. It doesn't make a nice noise, this engine. While the engine is sort of not the final word in oral enjoyment, the same can be said for the exhaust. With this stock system that's on it, it's pretty muted. I'm not really getting a hell of a lot of histrionics from the exhaust. I think if you did put an aftermarket system on it and freed things up a bit, I do think it'd sound better, but you know, it essentially just comes back to the boxer 4-cylinder not being the most sonorous thing to rev out and play. It's definitely not a musical instrument. It's one area where I guess as a sports car, they probably should offer a bit more histrionics. The adequate oomph from that engine is sent to the rear wheels via a Torsen limited slip diff and, thankfully in this car, a 6-speed manual transmission. It's a good manual box. It's not the best I've ever driven, but it is rather snappy. The throw is rather short and notchy and confidence inspiring. And it is easy to rush through the gears as well, which is very satisfying, has to be said, because there's nothing worse than being in a bespoke performance car and then the gearbox doesn't want to be rushed too much for fear of crunching gears or missing them completely. The dreaded money shift. But no, it's a good gearbox. One slightly tricky thing, and it just takes getting used to, is the clutch. It's the bite point is quite high up, and it's quite springy high up as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone jumped in this car for the first time and stalled it. I, of course, would never do that, but I can understand how it can happen, if you know what I mean. Pedal placement as well it's bang on for heel toe, which is much appreciated, because unlike some other Toyota GR products, there's no auto blip on the downshift for this. It's up to you and your fancy footwork to make sure that you don't have an awful inertia moment when you lift off the clutch. The mechanical limited slip diff in this car, it's interesting. The diff itself is quite aggressive, so you come into a corner and you jump on the power and you can feel it lock up. It does make getting the power down in sort of any condition enjoyable and exploitable. Perhaps the best part about the GR86, I really cannot fault it, is this car's steering. The steering in the GR86 is, I'm not going to say perfect, but it's pretty bloody close. It is light, it is communicative, and yeah, I'm a little bit taken aback by how good it is, considering it's still an EPAS system. There is some genuine feel here. At times the steering wheel even sort of wriggles around in your hands and gives you a sense of what's happening over the front axle and on the bitumen. I've driven some far more expensive performance cars recently that don't have steering as nice as this car. It's quite a quick rack as well, so it feels nice and direct, and in conjunction with interacting with this beautiful Lissom steering wheel, a very diminutive diameter, and crucially not thick rimmed. It's a nice thin rim like most GR products at the moment, and it is massively appreciated. So in conjunction with the lovely steering wheel, the steering is just such a satisfying thing to enjoy. You don't have to be going fast at all. You can just sort of mooch about on your favorite twisty road at 6/10 and just enjoy the sensations coming back through the steering wheel. It's really lovely, and I guess, you know, a part of why the steering feels so good will be that low curb weight, that low 1285 curb weight. The front axle isn't having to deal with much. It can just focus on being good at steering. It doesn't have to worry about, you know, huge amounts of weights from an ungainly engine or EV motors or batteries. It can just focus on being sublime steering. One thing that's not as enjoyable about the car is the brakes. So it's a 2-piston caliper up front with a 294mm disc and a single piston caliper at the rear with a 200mm disc. So not particularly big brakes, but that's not really my problem. As my colleague and assistant on this shoot noted, the brake pedal can feel quite wooden. It really doesn't give you the most amount of feedback. At times it's a little bit inert. How much that can be remedied by different pads and maybe some steel braided lines and some better fluid, I'm sure that's going to help a hell of a lot. But look, the car, because obviously once again doesn't weigh much, does pull up really well, and the pedal, like, it's not the easiest to modulate. It is a bit inert, but it is easy to pull up this car, and crucially, ABS intervention doesn't really happen too early on. It's not over servoed or anything like that as well. You know, when you use the brake pedal to be a fulcrum to get onto the gas when you're heel towing, it is easy in that respect, so I appreciate that quite a lot. Toyota has unveiled a special edition GR86, which is actually going to be launched in the final quarter of 2024, which has 4 piston Brembos up front, bigger discs, and 2 piston Brembos at the back with bigger discs. So I would imagine that those Brembo brakes are going to remedy quite a lot of the critiques and the criticisms that I have for these standard brakes. The ride quality in this car is another area as well where I guess it's not perfect, and it kind of just feels like it's one of the areas where you understand this is why it's a $50,000 performance car. This is one area where the car's been built to a budget. The ride is quite firm. It's not the most sophisticated, and it probably lacks a little bit of suppleness that I think would go a long way. I guess the dampers and the springs, they're not the most sort of sophisticated. There's been times where I've been really pushing on and you'll go over a serious compression and you can sort of feel like the car's getting a little bit unsettled and like you're sort of getting, I guess, spat out of the bump rather than the car just sort of soaking it up and gliding over it. But once again, this special edition that I mentioned before has, as standard, ZF Sachs dampers, which I'm sure will fix a large part of the issues I have with the standard suspension. It's not bad by any means. It does, you know, for a 50 grand sports car, it's not bad at all really, but it's one of the areas where you notice, okay, they haven't thrown the kitchen sink and a bunch of budget at the suspension. But, you know, if you really wanted to, aftermarket's pretty good for these cars. Bilsteins or Olin's or KW or whoever really, they'll no doubt do a kit for this car, which will make it make the ride miles better. Tyres on the GR86 play a huge part contributing to the car's overall personality. So the tyres in question are a Michelin Pilot Sport 4, and they're 215/40/18 squared all round. I understand the ethos of why it's such a narrow front and rear tyre. Lightweight sports car with just the right amount of power, and you've just got just the right amount of mechanical grip, and by having a narrower tyre front and rear, you're bringing all of the limits of the car down to a lower level. It's like, you know, it's bringing the confectionery jar all the way down to the bottom shelf, so it's easily accessible. All those things that we like as performance driving enthusiasts, you know, oversteer and feeling like you're on the limit through corners and having to, you know, manage the accelerator pedal on corner exit, and, you know, all these things. I understand why Toyota have done it, but, and look, yeah, it's absolutely, you know, the narrower tyres, even though they're quite sticky, the PS4s, it's succeeded in what they wanted to accomplish. This car is an absolute riot on a twisty road, but it's one of those things where it's almost like you need to be careful what you wish for, because even though this is a bespoke sports car, it doesn't have a lot of mechanical grip at all. And if you've got any experience in a more sort of premium sports car, anything from, you know, even like the Supra, for example, or anything from Porsche's stable or anything from BMW's stable of sports cars, this just doesn't have anywhere near the mechanical grip or cornering capability as standard. So you'll come into a corner with what you think is a decent amount of speed, nothing too severe, and even with traction fully on, the car just wants to stick the tail out massively. So you've got to be aware of what's going on constantly, and, you know, like I said, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because in one respect, especially in damp or wet, greasy conditions, but even in the dry, yeah, you'll just get huge amounts of oversteer sometimes without really expecting it. or maybe you'll expect like a small yaw moment, or a little drifteroo, and you'll end up with a handful of opposite lock. What do you think about the way this car looks? I personally love it. The GT86, I feel like it was okay looking, but the work that Toyota's done restyling this car, it is now an unequivocally, objectively attractive looking vehicle. There's some just really attractive lines over the bonnet and over the rear three-quarter that the previous car just didn't have. This is an attractive vehicle, and it turns heads. And if you like that sort of thing, I think there's an argument that a sports car probably should turn heads. It definitely will with this paintwork, but yeah, there's no getting away from the attractiveness of this car. The interior of the GR86, it's a mixture of quite good and sort of quite cheap. There's some scratchy plastics going on here. For example, that's shocking. But once again, for the price point, I don't really think you can ask too much. Crucially, it nails all of the sports car things really well. The seats are lovely, you sit nice and low, the bolstering is good, and with this combination sort of leather and Alcantara that I've got going on here, they hug me and grip me really well around corners, so nails that. The gear shifter as well, no complaints there whatsoever. It's got a manual handbrake, and if you're 16 years old, that's crucial. The digital dash, fashioned to look like two boxer pistons punching into each other. I really like that. It's very easy to read. Tells me all the right sort of information, and I'll throw some B-roll over the top. But you've got, all these different graphics for torque and power, and a G meter and a lap timer, and quite a bit of sort of handy stuff for what this car is meant to be, a sports car that is ready to take on track. The infotainment, it's not revelatory in any way. It's quite a small screen, but it is touch, which is nice. And it's, it's not brimming with pixels, but it's not intrusive at all. It doesn't stick up, rise out of the dash and disrupt my view out. That's worth speaking about as well. The view from inside the cabin is lovely. I've got great visibility all around, and the GR86 also does a neat trick of, the canopy making you feel like you're in something special, like an actual sports car, which is it's much appreciated. I really like it. I suppose it's not the interior's fault per se, but another area where from inside the cabin the GR86 is understandably, I guess, frustrating is the amount of road noise that's going on here. There's a distinct lack of sound deadening in places. That's been done to keep weight down, which I appreciate massively, but yeah, it's not super quiet in here, especially with Australian roads and the condition they're in at the moment. And yeah, it's I guess it's slightly frustrating because the cabin's quite loud, but then, as I mentioned before, the seats are quite comfortable, so it's a bit of an incongruous experience. I can do 300-400 Ks in the seats and get out feeling, not fatigued, not wrecked, but then the sort of the tyre roar and the lack of sound deadening, it's a bit of a pain in the bum. If you've got little ones like I do, you've got room in the back for two. I'm sure you could try and ferry around some mates in the back for a dare or a bit of a gag, but they're not really practical as seats for the most part. I suppose we should talk about competitors for the GR86, which is pretty difficult because of this car's quite low price point, especially in 2024 with rampant inflation. I don't know whether this car's got many real competitors. I suppose the only obvious one is the Mazda MX-5. I don't think you can really compare this car to the MX-5 that much. MX-5 in my eyes is more of a lifestyle vehicle. It's still a performance car, no doubt. It's still a sports car, it's got all the right ingredients, but the GR86 just feels like a more serious sports car in pretty much every regard than the MX-5. I'm not not sure I would use this as my everyday vehicle. I suppose for a lot of people it will be their only vehicle. You know, this car attracts demographics from all over the place, but I think for younger enthusiasts, for gents or gals in their 20s or early 30s, I think this is a really sweet proposition. If you were going to use this car as your sort of weekend warrior though, I think you can do a hell of a lot worse. It's definitely a bespoke sports car in nature. It feels as such, and even though some of the elements of the car, the engine, the brakes, the exhaust, may not be the best, this car, when you add everything together, it offers you a true sports car experience, a true enthusiast's experience at a fraction of the cost of some other performance cars in the market. And like I said, this car, even though it's got a retail price of around 50 grand, it does some things a hell of a lot better than cars that are worth 3-4 times as much, which is crazy to say, but it's true. And Toyota has to be applauded for, you know, providing this car to consumers. It's an enthusiast sports car for around 50 grand. There's almost none of those left, and it's a very fun thing. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know whether you like the video in the comments down below, what you want to see me drive next. We have got some more GR products coming to the channel quite soon, which I'm excited to drive, including this car's older brother, the Supra. Woo! Anyway, thanks for watching. See ya.